We're looking at live pictures of Parliament House, and there seems to be quite a lot of activity, a lot of movement of people up the stairs. I don't know if you can see these pictures as well, John.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, can you describe sort of the makeup of that building and where? I mean, I guess they're going into the chamber, but what's your sort of speculation as to what may be happening at this point?
It's very hard to say. I mean, the National Assembly, of course, is hugely important. And I think wisely, the leader of the opposition, Lee Jae-myung, in calling for the public to assemble there, has been, I think, seeking symbolically to protect what represents, if you like, the heart of democracy in South Korea. There have also been reports that the military has been sent in to try and limit access by the public. I hope what we're seeing is not a panic on the part of the public, but it's impossible to tell from those pictures what may be going on. But there's no doubt that protecting the institutions of government and the National Assembly will have huge symbolic as well as potentially practical importance.
Well, that video, you may recognize it, or at least recognize the scene, is from Tuesday this week at the National Assembly building in Seoul, South Korea, Republic of Korea. Those are Republic of Korea ROK Army troops surrounding the National Assembly building in the dead of the night to prevent the parliament from assembling to overrule a declaration of martial law from the president, Yoon Yeol, in a desperate bid to retain power. He had months of protests leading to this. He declared himself martial law against his leadership in the middle of the night, 11 o'clock at night. You know, the world watched scenes like that unfold where Korean opposition leaders and even his own party members and staff had to scale the walls around the building to convene the National Assembly. I got a video. Look at this. This is actually the head of the opposition getting into parliament.
국회를 지켜달라라고도 호소를 했습니다. 이재명 대표가 윤 대통령 더 이상 대통령이 아니다라고 선언을 했고 국민들을 향해서 국회로 모여달라라고 호소를 하고 있습니다. 자, 민주당 의원들이 지금 전원 국회로 지금 들어오고 있는 그런 상황이고요. 우원식 의장도 지금 이동을 하고 있고, 자, 한동훈 국민의힘 대표도 비상계엄 선포 잘못된 거다. 국민과 함께 막겠다라고 입장을 내놨습니다. 다시 한 말씀드리겠습니다.
Yeah, that's him at the top of the wall there. Civilians helped boost him up over the wall to get past the army that was blocking the main gate. You know, for many in the United States, these scenes may have seemed eerily familiar and at the same time represented, for me, a frightening foreshadowing of what could happen here. I mean, portions of the president's declaration of martial law felt like that could have been lifted from a Stephen Miller speech from here. Let me read just a little bit here on my screen. Dear citizens, I declare emergency martial law to defend the free Republic of Korea from the threats of North Korean communist forces and eradicate the shameless pro-North Korean anti-state forces that are plundering the freedom and happiness of our people, and to protect the free constitutional order. Replace North Korean communist forces with just communist, or, you know, who knows? It could have been written by Miller, and it is scary to think about that. So I guess the question I walked away with on Tuesday, maybe you did too, is, could that happen here? I mean, clearly our structure of government is different. They are a parliamentary system. Martial law is actually written in their constitution as an act that can be carried out. Obviously, they face a large threat. Their northern border, of course, has always been at war, still at war technically. But by the same token, we have laws on our books like the Insurrection Act and the National Emergency Act, which give the president wide latitude to use the military domestically, suspend some civil liberties, even override laws that are on the books. So over the years, the oversight of those national emergencies has really lacked, and the presidents have gained wider power, which has been demonstrated even under President Biden and President Trump. Biden used the national emergency for student loans, believe it or not, as well as, of course, Trump with the immigration. What's interesting to me is when I posted about this on Blue Sky, and those who are joining me on Blue Sky, thank you. I love you being there. I'm really enjoying the new community. You know, what somebody pointed out, actually, I talked about tightening our laws, and one of my followers on Blue Sky, whoever you are, thank you, pointed me to a recent action by the Niskanen Center of a cross-ideological coalition that's been working to change the laws on the National Emergency Act. That was a great time it kind of really hit me at the perfect timing as I saw this note and these letters. So I hunted down the guy who wrote it. And in light of the things in Korea, and of course, Trump's promises to be a dictator on day one, I said, you know what? We should talk about the laws that are already on the books and what they mean and what we should expect and what are the powers of the government in case of these things happening. So as always, I've got the perfect guest. So let's get the conversation going. I'm Fred Wellman. You're right here on the On Democracy podcast. Let's get on the show. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Once again, I am Fred Wellman, host of On Democracy, the FP Wellman, as I was before the music. Welcome back. Another crazy week. It's been a stressful few weeks since the election. And as each of Donald Trump's cabinet nominees have rolled out, there's been growing concern that maybe pieces are being put in place that will challenge our nation's institutions once again. Then the events in South Korea, which we showed earlier, were in many ways a wake-up call of what can happen in a democracy when a president seeks to expand their power by manipulating the laws. And then that's nonpartisan, by the way, any president. So fortunately, their institutions held, as we showed in the introduction. The parliament convened in accordance with their laws that voted against the martial law decree, and the military honored that vote and stood down. The president rescinded the order. So the institutions held, as did ours on January 6th, the last time they were really, really challenged. But this led to a lot of questions about, what do our laws say? I don't know if you were like me, but on Tuesday, I spent the day going, could this happen here? I don't know. I mean, the martial law is actually written into the Korean constitution. It's a very different step. It's a different kind of government. But again, could our laws be used in the hands of a bad actor? So as usual, I have the perfect guest to discuss that. And we're welcoming him now. Soren Dayton is the director of governance at the Niskanen Center. He focuses on developing and implementing institutional reforms and practices to deliver more effective government. He previously led institutional reform efforts at Protect Democracy. So he's a pro-democracy guy for a long time now. Soren, welcome to the show. I really appreciate you taking time on such short notice for us.
Glad to be here.
So I guess before we dive into all that stuff, tell me about the Niskanen Center. I know a little bit about it, but tell our viewers and guests, what is the Niskanen Center about? What do you guys do there?
We are a think tank that is a spinoff of the Cato Institute, actually.
Oh, okay.
Where the initial founder was the head of the Cato climate program and concluded he was wrong about climate. And I joke that everyone at Niskanen has two things. We are most of us have been, pretty much all of us have been wrong about something big, and most of us are sort of politically and culturally bilingual. You can drop us in a lefty space or a righty space, and we can be kind of authentic there. Yeah. And so in a world where people don't, in a Washington D.C. of sort of red and blue teams, we are. We have lots of red and blue. I'm a red.
Yeah.
But we're used to dealing with the other team, and so we find ourselves as a sort of go-between, and we do a lot of sort of heterodox policy. Usually good policy means you got to kill sacred cows on both sides.
Yeah.
And so we make a lot of sacred steak.
Well, that's what we are. I mean, there's things we agree on. Pro-democracy means pro-democracy, whatever that means. So it is that thing. And we opened the show. Actually, I got this idea because I watched things in South Korea, and I guess there's been two things been talked about a lot lately, right? In the last 5-6 years is the Insurrection Act and, of course, the National Emergencies Act. And we've got these national emergencies been declared. There's a law on the books. I guess the best way to start right there is what exactly is the law that governs national emergency declarations, and what is the power that it gives the president?
Yeah. So till 1976, there actually wasn't really any law on this, which is kind of wild.
Wow, I know.
Most countries have constitutional frameworks like the South Koreans did with martial law. And, so starting in 71, actually led by a Republican senator, there was a thorough review of all the national emergencies on the books that weren't, so we're not talking like, there's a tornado in, Missouri, right? That's a natural disaster. This is something different. And they went through, found all the ones on the books, terminated most of the existing ones, and created a framework where Congress could terminate existing emergencies. And so, like the South Korea example, where the president declared martial law and then the parliament voted it down.
Yeah.
We had a system in place where Congress could, passing a resolution through both chambers, say, it's not how we want to do that, right? And it's illegal, it's politics, right? Which is a fine thing to do in this whorehouse, as it were, right? Like, you can say, no, we're not going to do that because we don't think it's right, or because we want to embarrass you, or whatever.
Right.
And the idea in that bill was that every 6 months, Congress would meet and evaluate the national emergencies on the books.
Right.
And, and turn off the ones that weren't appropriate. Now, two things went wrong.
I was going to say, that was my next question. It didn't work. Things went awry quickly, didn't they?
So two things went wrong. The first one is that in 1983, there was a Supreme Court decision, INS v. Chadha, that had to do with the deportation process of a Indian/Kenyan citizen who was in the United States, came on a student visa, and then was going to be deported.
Right.
Don't want to go down that rabbit hole. It's kind of wild. But anyways, those are the rabbit holes that we get Supreme Court decisions on.
Yeah.
But what that decision said is that mechanism, which is called a legislative veto of both chambers voting down, or one chamber in the case of which is what the Supreme Court case was about.
Yeah.
One chamber turning off a presidential action is not constitutional.
Okay.
You actually need a law, and they called it, to use fancy lawyer talk, bicameralism. That is, both houses act, and presentment. It's presented to the president for signature.
Got it.
And so at first, that's like, oh, none of this stuff works. Then they went through, after a couple of years, and passed something so that you would need a joint resolution. That is, both houses pass the thing that cancels it.
Right.
And then the president has to sign it, which means it's a 2/3 requirement. So it's sort of like a veto override.
Right.
Rather than the simple majority in each chamber. So that's the first thing that went wrong.
Yeah.
The Supreme Court gutted it in 1983. Then the second thing that went wrong is, remember that thing I said about every 6 months they're supposed to look?
Yeah.
They never did that.
No way.
The first time they did that was 2019.
Wow.
After Trump declared the national emergency at the southern border.
Okay.
And that was the first time in the history, I guess I got to do math in my head right now. And that was 33 years before they actually considered this.
Wow.
And in that case, you had 12 Senate Republicans voting to terminate the emergency, along with the 47 Democrats in the Senate. So you had 59. You had a 59-41 vote in the Senate.
Yeah.
And I think you had 15. The people weren't there, so it might have been 12. You had a handful of Republicans in the House also voting to terminate. Now, it was a Democratic House at the time.
Right.
So, you had bipartisan majorities overturning the national emergency, but because of that Supreme Court decision, it needed to be, Trump could veto that termination.
Right.
And so we're in this situation where we don't, Congress intended a way for it to check a president, but it hasn't been used and it hasn't been reformed. And by the way, the same thing applies to other issues, right? So like war powers, arms sales, a whole bunch of other weird things that happen where these have been used more often. And so, in fact, Trump vetoed 6 things before he was, before the 2020 election. Yeah. And all of them were this mechanism. There were 2 national emergency terminations. There was 1 war powers involving Yemen, and there were 3 arms sales to Saudi Arabia. And in every case, you had bipartisan majorities of both chambers saying, no, that's not what this is for.
Yeah.
And so it's a real powerful bop on the nose, right? Yeah. I mean, it's sort of, Congress is condemning this action. Even if it doesn't change the law, it's still a really powerful political signal.
And it's the voice of the Congress, and sort of that approach, that checks and balances and things like that. I guess while I'm there, so what is the power? What can the president do when he declares a national emergency? Like what is the power given him in the law? And then of course, as we've already been saying, how is that more? I mean, I imagine that's also morphed too. But in the law, what does it say? Like, so I say, hey, like you said, Donald Trump says there's a national emergency, the border, X. What is that? What power does that allow him to do? Things.
So what the National Emergencies Act does is so the president makes a declaration, right, and it's like, there's an emergency for XYZ.
Right. And
then I'm going to unlock the following authorities to respond to that emergency. That's the way you think about it.
Okay.
Right. And then all over the U.S. Code, there's these provisions lying around that say, in case of emergency, you can use this power. And, actually a lot of what happened in COVID, both at the federal and state level, was a form of this, in most but not all cases, because of a public health emergency, which is again different than an emergency regarding than a quote national emergency. Although with COVID we had both a national emergency and a public health emergency. We're going to get to that in a bit. Okay. But there's this idea that when you have a state of emergency, you can use these powers. Now, what kinds of powers are we talking about? That's everything from like bypassing certain laws. Like, so when you have a hurricane hit Puerto Rico, one of the things that usually happens is that you have a national emergency, both for disaster response, but then we're going to waive the provisions of the Jones Act that make shipping more expensive. Okay. Right. Or we're going to, you saw at a state level when Governor Shapiro, when I-95 melted down, right? Governor Shapiro had an emergency that's like, we're going to waive all the laws so we can get this thing built in the weekend. And he did, right? So it's like, these are perfectly normal, reasonable things. But then there's some weird stuff out there, right? So, in the Telecommunications Act, actually the Communications Act, it wasn't Telecommunications Act, in the Communications Act of 1934, there's a provision that says, in case of emergency, the president can seize radio stations and turn off radio transmission. Well, I don't know about you. I'm speaking to you on my AirPods, which are connected by radio Bluetooth to my laptop, which is connected by radio Wi-Fi to an internet, which is talking to you in St. Louis, right? So, does that mean the president can turn off my AirPods? Wow. That's kind of what the law says. Now, that's only because they didn't go back and fix what they did in 1934. Wow. Another example is, and this came up after, during COVID in the Biden, so Trump declared a national emergency over COVID in March of 2020. Yep. And then it was confirmed in February of 2021 by Biden, and then January of 2022 by Biden. And in 2022, Biden said, because of that emergency, we're going to cancel student loans worth $400 billion because of the COVID emergency. Right. Now, the national emergency that was declared under COVID, the only power it gave was waiving certain eligibility requirements for Medicaid treatments. It had nothing to do with student loans. Right. So there's this second danger, which is there's all these powers that say in case of emergency, but there's nothing requiring the president to tell you what there's nothing requiring the declaration
to lay out the powers.
Only specify those emergencies, right?
So
there's
like a bullet.
all these things
he really
lying
can
around.
Use whatever he wants. Yeah, it's not a bullet list.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so there's all sorts of things like involuntary testing of chemical weapons on U.S. persons.
Okie dokie.
That's out there. Or there's a whole bunch of sanction systems that we do via the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. So when Russia invaded Ukraine, the first thing we did is we imposed sanctions under an emergency system where we couldn't, where Americans couldn't do transactions and we would stop them in banking. Right. Do you remember the girls in Nigeria? We stopped all transactions with Boko Haram globally as an emergency in response to that. Right. We have an emergency that says you can't do commerce with Muammar Gaddafi or his family. Right. Mr. Gaddafi is dead. His family is still around. It's still on the books, right? So we can do all these sorts of things. And so in many ways, especially in foreign policy, the national emergency system is a sort of weird, intended to be temporary, right? That emergency, an emergency is something that's unexpected, right, and gets a short-term response. So that's, again, there's all sorts of things lying around the U.S. Code. There's been Liza Goitein at the Brennan Center has a review of all the emergency powers on the books. I think there's something like 150, 200 of all sorts. Some of them are totally mundane, make it easier to transport hazardous equipment in certain natural disasters, blah, blah, blah. But some of them are really weird.
Yeah. Whew, okay. All right, that's a good place to pause. Let's do sponsors, and I'm going to come back. That's a lot, and I got to talk more, so let's take a break for our sponsors. We'll come right back. You guys, I take a metric ton of pictures. I'm not going to lie to you. And from events and moments that I capture every day, from the pretty sunset to those really fun moments with my fiance and our kids, it doesn't seem that sometimes I feel like all of my favorite photos that are just stuck on my camera roll, right? And I think to myself, would it be great to have an easy way to share and enjoy them with my friends and my family, especially all my wonderful kids on the other side of the country? And that's where Aura comes in. It's named the #1 digital photo frame by Wirecutter. Aura makes it effortless to upload unlimited photos and videos directly from your phone, so your favorite memories are always within view into the frame. Plus, you can personalize and preload an Aura frame for a truly special, unforgettable gift this year. I love all the photos from our hikes. I love my goofy dogs doing goofy things. I've got a tortoiseshell cat that I take entirely too many pictures of. But at the same time, I really want to see those fun photos of my grandkids and their big moments. And that's what makes Aura so great. It's super easy to set up. It just takes 2 minutes to set up the frame using the app on your phone. It's a perfect gift, especially this time of year. There's unlimited private storage. I like it because it's private too, so it's not out there on Facebook where people can see it. And finally, it's fun. You have fun interactions. You can actually do like emojis and love a photo because there's 2 photo frames, one at their house and one at mine. So this year, saving the perfect gift by visiting auraframes.com to get $35 off Aura's best-selling Carver matte frames by using promo code FRED at checkout. That's auraframes.com, promo code FRED. This deal is exclusive to our listeners and our viewers, so get yours now in time for the holidays. There are some terms and conditions apply, but you're going to love this product. I'm the son of a Marine. I grew up in Missouri around weapons. We had weapons in my family. From there, I spent most of my life in the Army. So firearms are a part of my life. Firearms have always been a part of my life. But, I also have kids, so securing my weapon is as important to me as safely operating it. And that's why I love StopBox. The thing about them is there's no keys to be found and used. There's no digital code they can remember. It's a simple and safe answer to safe storage of your weapons. And if you own a handgun for self-defense, your storage almost always fits into one of 2 somewhat frustrating categories, right? It's either properly locked away, which it should be, safe, but completely out of reach in an emergency. Let's be honest. Most of our gun safes are very hard to access. Or worse, it's unsecured, leaving it vulnerable to anyone, to include children, which is just unacceptable, folks. We just cannot do that and be reasonable, smart gun owners. So that second one's far too dangerous for me. Now, StopBox USA saw the problem and designed a groundbreaking solution, the StopBox Pro. With the StopBox Pro, you'll never have to choose between security and readiness again. It's an ingenious push-button locking system, which gives you fast, reliable access when every second matters in an emergency. Without the hassle of keys or reliance on batteries that can go bad after a while. It's 100% mechanical, so it works every time, no power needed. With StopBox USA, you can finally have both security and readiness. The Stopbox Pro's mechanical keyless system allows for fast, secure access without the risk of you fumbling for keys when every second counts, or worse, someone finding those keys you don't want to. And again, as I mentioned, it's battery free, so you won't worry about getting locked out because the battery's failed. You know, another feature I've loved about the Stopbox Pro is it's a TSA compliant. Now, you don't need another box if you have to transport your weapon. You can securely and conveniently transport your firearm through checked baggage and airline travel, which is really rare. Usually you have to have 2 or 3. So for me, as a weapon owner who also believes in safe storage, I'm happy to endorse Stopbox Pro. For a limited time only, our listeners are getting a crazy deal. Not only do you get 10% off your entire order when you use code FRED, F-R-E-D, at StopboxUSA.com, but they're going to also give you a buy one, get one free for their Stopbox Pro. That's 10% off and a free Stopbox Pro when you use code FRED at StopboxUSA.com. Discover a better way to balance security and readiness for your firearms with Stopbox. And we're back. Okay, so I'm still kind of processing. How many did you say was the list at the Brennan Center?
I think it's like 150, 200, somewhere in there. I mean, it's
quite a menu.
They go through and they like, we don't want this in the normal case, but if you really need this, we should make sure it's there. It's the right thing to do in a lot of cases, right? Like you have a national pandemic. You want to make sure it's easier and you don't have to do paperwork to get your Medicaid. Right. Healthcare, right? That's a pretty normal, obvious thing.
Right.
When Josh Shapiro has a road meltdown, they're like, okay, we can do a little bit of environmental damage to get I-95 running a little more quickly. That's fine. We're all okay with that. So you want that, but then what about the situations that you don't want?
Right. Like,
and that's I think why we're talking today.
Yeah, and I mean, we saw this during the a good example, of course, was during the George Floyd riot, or protests. I don't want to say that. The protests and stuff. How does that interpreted as a national emergency, and then what powers are given? And if I heard you right,
that was never
a national emergency.
Just to be clear, that was never a national emergency.
Right.
And there are, you mentioned the Insurrection Act. There are powers that are like that are not technically emergencies that you can use, the military or things like that. There's been discussions. President Trump, the once and future President Trump has said or other people have said, and he said, yes, he'll use national emergencies to address immigration. Now that could be everything from redirecting some funding streams to build detention facilities on military bases, right? That's a pretty, I don't love that policy, but that's like that's like a normal use of the thing, to more crazy things. But the secret about so many of these things is it's not what's illegal; it's actually what's legal.
Right.
That's shocking. Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of where we started, right? Is like, and that's the thing with the Korean thing. It was sort of legal what he did, believe it or not. There was some nuance to that because he was supposed to ask Parliament first. But here, that's when, as I started researching this before we even spoke, I was like, there's a lot of legal things you can do. Like you said, the Brennan Center has a list of 150 laws that have some of these windows in them. And there's no need for there's no requirement by the president to even put a bullet list on that. And you can just sort of pick and choose from his menu and just do what he needs to do. And I think what scares a lot of Americans probably is, what does that like say, for example, if it's a secret thing, like using our intelligence services, for example, or other things. I mean, I think that's when people, they start getting scary, right? Or is that even a thing?
Again, that's not
good.
Those are not the sorts of powers that are unlocked. But I will say, we don't have great reporting. When I testified to Congress last year on this, one of the things that people in both parties got very surprised and nervous about is we don't get reports from the government about how they use emergencies. So, to give an example of the sort of brokenness of this system, the 9/11 national emergency is still on the books.
Jeez. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, the last report filed by the Department of Defense over this was filed, I have to go back and check, I think it was 2013 or 2014. The last known use of a power under the 9/11 emergency was, I think, 2017. That was you're a military guy, you'll know this term. That was a stop loss
Right.
on fighter pilot retirements. Right. We are not. That is not a consequence of 9/11. If you want that power, you've passed a defense bill. I got to do math here. 15 times since 9/11. You don't need to do that as an emergency based on 9/11. So there's this problem that you have these zombie emergencies. I mentioned a radio thing. There's a world where the 9/11 emergency would still be on the books. Wow. And you could use that to turn off the radios, turn off my AirPods.
Sure.
So that's the kind of thing that's scary and weird.
Right.
And nobody's been willing to clean this up. Right. Nobody's been willing to clean this up.
You can say in theory that we caught an ISIS infiltration team coming across the Mexican border. Therefore, it's a threat of a second 9/11. Therefore, I mean, when you layer.
You don't even need to make that argument.
God.
So, the student loan thing was just like, oh, we have COVID. Because we have COVID, we can do this student loan program that Biden had been saying for years he wanted to do. There was no nexus to COVID.
Right.
It's just like, we got the power. Let's go use it.
Yeah. It's sort of a get out of Congress free pass, isn't it? Right. It's like, I have a policy I want to do. I've got an emergency that kind of generally fits it. We can mix and match. And in the hands of a malignant leader, sometimes it gets pretty scary, right? We have seen Bannon and we've seen Kash Patel, who may be FBI director, which is terrifying. They've laid out their plans, and of course there is Project 2025. There's some very deep plans in there too. So it's a little scary. So
Project 2025 embraced reform on this. Now it was funny. They did it in the education section because of the student loan program. But I think there is a consensus for what the answer is. I mean, frankly, Joe Biden wrote a law review piece in 85, 86, something like that, saying, here's the fix. The fix is that, we should have the emergency end quickly. Yeah. And then Congress passes something to confirm and extend it.
Right.
We've known that since 1985, 86. Stephen Breyer, then a circuit court judge, gave a speech right after the decision at Georgetown, told us what to do. Yeah. The first bill introduced to fix that was introduced in 2019 by Senator Mike Lee after the border wall, and it had 19 Republicans on it, and Gary Peters joined it. The Democratic senator, joined it after it came out of committee. But it's, we know what the answer is. The question is, do we have the courage to do it? So and we've been sort of bouncing back and forth trying to figure it out.
And there is a bipartisan consensus that, because look, it is partisan driven because each party thinks everyone's going to use it malignantly or maliciously, right? So, and I get that. So the reason I stumbled on you is because, and I was telling the story in our pre-show, is like one of my Blue Sky followers, thank you, Blue Sky, said, hey, because I mentioned that, hey, I'm concerned about our own laws that are on the books and if we can do something about it. And he goes, well, funny thing. And they literally linked me to this letter, which has, you guys, this is a reform one. We could talk about it. 35 groups, if I'm counting correctly. You got, and these are completely ideological cross lines I've never seen before. I mean, ACLU and you, so you managed to get 35 organizations, and this is signed on October 4th, demanding reform, right? What does this letter talk about? What are you guys asking for when you talk about reform?
So the first thing is, as I said, there has been a basic consensus on what the reform ought to look like, and what it does. And there's some details you got to sort out. Yeah. But basically, what it does is the president gets 30 days with an emergency, and then it automatically terminates unless Congress extends it, and then it would extend it for a year at a time. Okay. Yeah. And that. The first time that bill was introduced, 2019, after Trump declared the border wall thing, that bill was introduced, 19 Republicans, and it was actually moved through committee and lost 2 votes, both Republicans, Josh Hawley and Rex Scott.
Of course.
And that's been the sort of definition of what the reform should look like. And then there's, you sort of, 2 years later, 2022, 2023, 2024, 2025, 2026, 2027, 2028, 2029, 2030, 2031, 2032, 2033, 2034, 2035, 2036, 2037, 2038, 2039, 2040, 2041, 2042, 2043, 2044, 2045, 2046, 2047, 2048, 2049, 2050, 2051, 2052, 2053, 2054, 2055, 2056, 2057, 2058, 2059, 2060, 2061, 2062, 2063, 2064, 2065, 2066, 2067, 2068, 2069, 2070, 2071, 2072, 2073, 2074, 2075, 2076, 2077, 2078, 2079, 2080, 2081, 2082, 2083, 2084, 2085, 2086, 2087, 2088, 2089, 2090, 2091, 2092, 2093, 2094, 2095, 2096, 2097, 2098, 2099, 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004, 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008, tweak it around the edges. And Democrats have introduced versions of it. Then there were bipartisan versions of it. But this year you had, or I guess last year, you had bipartisan bills introduced in both chambers, and you had committees moving it on a bipartisan basis unanimously in the House.
Wow.
And losing one Republican in the Senate, Josh Hawley. We got Rick Scott's vote, but we lost Josh Hawley.
Of course. My guy.
All over tariffs, by the way, not over the core issue,
Yeah.
but because of the international sanctions thing, you can impose tariffs over that.
Yeah.
So, we know what the answer is. The question is, can we actually do it? And frankly, we had the same letter in 2020 or no, in 2022.
Yeah.
And I think the only reason that didn't happen is because Democrats were afraid to change, to tweak the student loan program, right? They didn't, that was getting litigated. And so there's this big challenge right now where people in both parties want extraordinary powers for things, whether it's student loans or fighting climate change on the Democratic side, or for immigration and various other things on the Republican side.
Yeah.
And, our champions on this are Mike Lee and Chip Roy on the Republican side. These guys are all in on Trump's immigration program, but they're, they understand that they need to protect the power of Congress too. And you have Democrats, you got Steve Cohen, you got Eleanor Holmes Norton from DC, you got, Dick Blumenthal and Chris Murphy. I mean, you got like the full range of people. They know what the answer is.
Yeah.
But you need the White House to say yes. And now you need the Trump administration, the Trump transition team to say yes. And so it's, we're going to be in this weird situation where we'll probably use the existing national emergency to force votes again and to force good conflict over this, but we may not cut them off.
Scary. I mean, it is scary to me. I mean, I can't deny that because there's a lot of leeway in there for them to do some interesting things, and we know this incoming team has been studying the heck out of it to make sure they can figure it out and are ready to.
Well, they used it, right? They used it before.
Yeah, the first time.
I guess the thing, and this may be a little unpopular with your audience, like Biden could have done this.
Yeah.
Biden knew what the right answer was in 1985, 1986.
Yep.
He had, we had legislation. They could have said, we're willing to do this, but instead they did the student loan program, right? And you had green groups out there saying, you need to ban, you need to stop, trade in natural gas and oil using this.
Yeah.
And look, people want their things.
Yeah.
But if you believe in democracy, you're never going to get all your things.
Right.
And you got to have the fights over it. And so I think this is, we're sitting here the week after the pardon, and this is like, when did Biden actually want to spend his political capital on this?
Yeah.
And, and I'm not,
No,
I mean, it's not like,
it's
not like Trump's going to do it,
right?
But we actually, we gave him the layup, and he didn't take it, right?
Well,
we gave him the layup.
It's been a conversation we've had before here on the show, and in private conversations. Is we had some really opportunity for the last 4 years. We should have been tightening. We should have been doing things like this, reforming laws, tightening them. We know that the last Trump administration cared exactly give two shits about the Hatch Act, for example. And we didn't. There was a lot of reforms that should have been done that didn't get done, and it is very frustrating. And perhaps it was hope that we wouldn't go back. I don't know. But here we are now. Now we got to talk about it, right?
There were a couple. I just want to say there were a couple. So, for example, one thing people have talked about, and if you think national emergencies are nerdy, take your uppers, right? There's this thing called impoundment that you may have heard about, right? Yeah. Where, and this is something we created after Nixon, where Congress says you have to spend this money, and Nixon said, no, I'm not going to, and money can be delayed a little bit. Yeah. And that's in fact what Trump did with Zelensky on that perfect phone call where he's like,
Right.
give me the dirt on Hunter,
Right.
or, and then you'll get your missiles, right? That was technically a withholding of apportionment, an apportionment of funds, blah, 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 blah. So we actually got something passed. Right after that, Lindsey Graham added to all of his bills. He wrote the foreign operations bills. He's like, I'm going to find out when money's delayed.
Right.
Right. So that immediately happened, and it got passed on a bipartisan basis, and it's in law right now that every time the federal government makes a decision about how and when money is authorized to move, that now goes up on a website. It's a terrible website, but my friends at Protect Democracy created this thing, OpenOMB, openomb.org, where you can actually see in a useful, human readable way when that happens. So, Russ Vought in Project 2025, the OMB chapter, boring, but like political philosophy, a really important political philosophy, says we're going to impound.
Yeah.
And we're going to know because we have that transparency now that we didn't have.
Right.
So there were a couple of things we did, but they were small and boring.
Yeah.
And the White House was almost always opposed at every opportunity.
Right.
So here we are. We got the smallest things we can.
Yeah.
But it's something.
Yeah. And so I guess the big question then, that the monster question that we have to ask is what's next? I mean, I think probably you're too late in this session to get the bill passed. Obviously, it's the lame duck session's only got a week or so left.
There's the end of the year bills, right? There's a big national defense bill.
Yeah.
There's a big spending bill, and it can go in those. We are working to make sure that happens. And then the other thing is they might just have a vote on it anyways, right?
Right.
Like you've seen, imagine in the U.S. Senate holding a vote on this. You put a Mike Lee Rand Paul bill with a whole bunch of Republicans who have supported in the past and say, are you for this or not?
Yeah.
And I think you're going to get, the people that are saying no to Matt Gaetz and saying no to Pete Hegseth are going to be like, yeah, we want some skin in this game.
And it's a nice safety net. I mean, I see it as a safety net politically for them.
Yeah.
If it's written in law forever, they don't have to stand up to him publicly ever again, right? It's if I was a MAGA Republican, or semi-MAGA, right?
Uh-huh. I mean, they'll need to vote on things, right?
Eventually.
I mean, this is the thing, right? This is the thing. Do politicians want to avoid blame for the bad thing happening, or do they want to get credit for the thing they say is good, right? Or blame for they'd rather cheer, but have no power than have power and be held accountable. So I think there's a difficulty here.
Yeah.
Some of them actually want to be accountable.
Yeah. Wow.
And the ones that want to be accountable are not evenly. I mean, they're in both parties, and the ones who don't want to be accountable are in both parties. But that's the fight here. It's not. Are you for Trump or are you against Trump? It's, do you want power in Congress?
Right.
And do you want to say on these things?
Which is if you're a strict constitutionalist, like so many of us say they are. If you're a strict constitutionalist, you want to make sure you kept your Section 2 powers, right? It's. I think so much of the Section 2 power has bled over, and we're seeing that now.
Article 1, not Article 2.
Sorry.
Article 1.
Sorry, it's been a long day.
Rumsfeld said.
Sorry about that.
Don't ask me, man. They're Congress. They're the first article.
They always tell us that too. I should know that. You can tell I was never a congressional staffer. If you've ever had a conversation with a congressional staffer, right? You were one, weren't you? It's like if you talk to a congressional staffer, the first thing, we're Article 1, you son of a bitch. So that's fair. I was in the executive branch, so what would I know? That's fantastic. Well, I think it's great. So is there things we can do? Should our followers, should our viewers, can they write their senator, write their Congress, say, hey, this law, this act is on the books. Right. Can you get off your ass and do something about it before it's too late?
I think one, you should, people should write their members of Congress.
Yeah.
And ask for this. Two, one, hopefully we can get it done both, this Congress.
Yeah.
If not, I think the question that people ought to be asking, frankly, throughout the Trump administration, and I think this is, I kind of think more good political conflict is better because you know where people are, and so I wish we had more votes in Congress where you could see where people are. But I think, if Trump declares an emergency, I think they should ask people in Congress to force votes on this.
Yeah.
Like, you could have done this, right? I mean, I'm gonna go off the script here for a second. Any member of Congress could have forced a vote on what was happening in Gaza. I have been in rooms with progressive members of Congress that pound the table about how offensive what's happening in Gaza is. And I'm like, okay, you know what? You have the power to force a vote on this. 535 members of Congress have the power. Why don't you do it? And they're like, I don't. They don't want to be on the hook for their position.
Right.
They just want to talk to the press. So I think the question is, you got to hold people accountable. And so, regardless of whether this reform happens in the Trump era, there's going to be other issues that your people are going to want to put pressure on people in Congress to pick a side and fight on. And so that would be my message.
I love it.
And I should probably do some writing so it's easier to see what that means.
Yes.
But that's my message here.
I agree. And it's a message I've been using since the election, Frank, is like, we have power. That, just don't believe for 1 second that somehow I get very angry, because especially on the left, there's a lot of people just sort of almost surrendering. It feels like sometimes, it's all his loss. I'm like, fuck, he hasn't even been inaugurated yet. We have lots of power. And like you said earlier, the Gates failure, the Hegseth pending failure, others, the gentleman just left from the DEA, the public pressure does work on both sides of the aisle, that these congressmen are affected by public pressure. They do believe there'll be elections again. And besides that, they do believe that they don't want to face their constituents and the anger. So we as individual Americans have a lot of power to organize and force this. And in cases like this, it may be with people from the other side of the aisle, because it's worth it. And the day after the election, I had a wonderful conversation with one of my friends that I needed. She showed how in Virginia, when they cut veterans benefits, it had been a bipartisan fight back. That it was Republicans and Democrats saying, there were signs outside the Richmond Capitol saying, "Damn it, our veterans deserve this education benefit." So we're right on the same sheet of music, no matter where we are in the partisan divide. We have the power to fight back. So with that, I really appreciate your time. So I love shows where I learn shit, and I learned so much shit today. So thanks so much, and keep in touch with us. Let us know if we can help you. Where can our folks find more about you and the Niskanen Center?
Niskanencenter.org. Nobody can spell Niskanen, although it's right here.
Yeah,
Niskanen center.org.
Okay.
And, if you just Google me, Soren Dayton, I'm pretty sure I'm the only one in the world. You'll find me.
I found you.
And I looking forward to talking more.
Good. Thanks so much, Soren. Appreciate your time. We'll be in touch again. I got a feeling.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Okay.
Bye now.
Have a good day.
Oh my God, I learned so much. One of the reasons I literally started this show originally because I just wanted to talk to cool people, and talking to Soren today is a perfect example. I don't know about you guys, but that conversation had a whole lot of things that I didn't know. I'm not necessarily sure I'm less fucking scared, but at least I'm informed, and you're informed, and I hope you enjoyed that, because I really did, and there is work for us to do. I'm so glad you found our show on your favorite podcast platform or video. Of course, we're on the Midas Touch Network. We're really doing a lot more cool stuff on the On Democracy channel YouTube. That's at On Democracy channel. We've just added, I'm so excited, we've now added a live Sunday show that we're live streaming every Sunday. It's really cool. We just had our debut this Sunday on the On Democracy channel, including we had Rachel Vindman and Rena Shah on a panel. We had great interviews with the head of the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, my friend Jess Piper. This week I've got actress Heather Thomas and my friend Sarah Beth Rosenberg from New York going to be on our panel, which should be interesting and hilarious. I'm lining up some interviews with elected officials. It's going to be a great show every Sunday live, 11 a.m. Eastern time. I hope you'll start joining that. It's just a lot. My goal is to have a fun and informative show, because it's Sunday morning. And let's face it, the network channel's Sunday morning shows have gone awry. As I mentioned, I actually found out about Soren from Blue Sky. I'm now on Blue Sky. I'm at FP Wellman, as always, .bluesky.social, whatever those handles are, we'll put up on the screen. And our Substack is still growing like crazy. Thank you so much for joining our Substack community, FP Wellman on there as well. basically everywhere you want to look for me, I'm FP Wellman. So we'd love to have you join us. In the meantime, tell your friends about the show, like, share, subscribe will be key. I'd love to have you subscribe. Obviously, Miles touched out, we're up to like 3.4 million now. We're going to be doing a lot more of these kind of shows. You're going to see a lot less Trump videos. You're going to see a lot more discussions of what we can do as Americans to do our part for the democracy. As you know, my message from the election is get in the fight. It's not over. We're not surrendering anytime soon. So I'll urge you over and over, as you heard from Soren, the power of public pressure and organizing works. 35 completely diverse groups who would not normally sign up for anything together signed this letter to Congress asking for them to pass bipartisan reform for the National Emergencies Act. So we can do that. We have to do that. Put aside our differences on the key issues that we care about and fight back. With that, I can't wait to see you Sunday. I can't wait to see you back here on next week. I'm Fred Wellman. Thanks for joining us on the On Democracy channel.